Jala-jala is a fourth-class municipality in the province of Rizal, Philippines. According to the 2010 census, it has a population of 30,074 people. Etymology. What is now the town's barangay Punta was the seat of an earlier settlement later known as Hilaan. During the summer from April to May, the shores of Laguna de Bay along Punta would be filled with small shellfish locally known as Hilaan. As is typical with many modern Philippine toponyms, the town's name supposedly resulted from miscommunication between early Spanish visitors and natives. The Spaniards inquired of some natives along the shoreline, "Como se llama ese sitio?" to which the latter replied, "Hilanpo," thinking that the foreigners referred to the shells. The Spaniards accepted the response as the name of the place, and began calling it Hilaan, later corrupting it into Jalajala. Another folk etymology is that Jalajala stems from an endemic breed of boar called Burkiala, which is abundant in the wilds around the town and is depicted on its seal. As with the other story, a Spaniard asked the Tagalog-speaking natives the place's name, and the locals' interjection of Jalajala was taken by the Spaniards to be their answer. Geography. Jalajala is on a peninsula located 75 kilometers southeast of Manila in the largest freshwater lake in the Philippines, Laguna de Bay. It lies on the eastern part of the Rizal province and has a land area of 4,930.00 hectares, representing 3.77% of the total land area of the province. Jalajala's political boundary on the north is the Pangil River, wherein it shares the boundary with the town of Pacal in Laguna. On its southern, eastern, and western boundaries lies the Laguna de Bay. Mount Sembrano forms the boundary of Jalajala and Pilya. Barangays. Jalajala is politically subdivided into 11 barangays. Bayugad, Pali-Pali, and Sip-Sipin were elevated as barrios in 1956. Bagambong, Bayugo, 2nd District, 3rd District, Lubo, Pajkalinawan, Pali-Pali, Punta, Sip-Sipin, 1st District, Palaman. History. World War II. After the invading commands over the few months and 5 years by the retreating of all stronghold of the local Rizalino resistance, fighters under the Colonel Markings guerrillas and the Hunters ROTC guerrillas around in the town of Jalajala by attacking Japanese forces and the Makapili collaborating rebels during the post-counter-insurgencies under by Japanese occupation on 1945 and before. The local Filipino troops of the Philippine Commonwealth Army and Philippine Constabulary units recaptured the towns during their liberation, started the Allied invasion of Jalajala on January to August 1945. Local military forces of Filipino soldiers under the Philippine Commonwealth Army 4th, 41st, 42nd, 43rd, 45th, 46th and 47th Infantry Division and the Philippine Constabulary 4th Infantry Regiment was recaptured and invaded the municipal town of Jalajala and aided the helpful of all local Rizalino guerrilla resistance fighters under the Colonel Markings guerrillas and the Hunters ROTC guerrillas in the defeated and attacking the fort against the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces and the Makapili collaborating rebels. Meanwhile, around the captured, bombed and destroyed the plains, rice fields, rivers and forests at the municipal town of Jalajala was entering the battles and invading commands from the couple of 8 months and 1 years, beginning the liberation of all the stronghold of local Filipino soldiers, military officers, tank commanders, military truck and jeeps, military IFVs, artillery and mortars and many other military equipments under the 4th, 41st, 42nd, 43rd, 45th and 46th Infantry Division of the Philippine Commonwealth Army and the 4th Infantry Regiment of the Philippine Constabulary was sending the local military operations around and rival the towns in Jala-jala, and they captured, bombed and destroyed the Roman Catholic churches, municipal town halls, plazas, villages and many others. They burned and attacked and defeated by the Imperial Japanese troops, military officers, tank commanders, military truck and jeeps, military IFVs, artillery and mortars and many other military equipments under the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces, and they captured in Jalajala by the local Filipino ground troops. The American fighter and bomber planes under the United States Army Air Forces entered the town, and Jalajala was supported and helping be aided by the local Filipino soldiers under the Philippine Commonwealth Army and Philippine Constabulary, and the local Rizalino resistance fighters under the Colonel Markings guerrillas and the Hunters ROTC guerrillas around the municipal towns, was liberated and defeating Japanese soldiers under the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces. The inside of all Japanese troops and officers under the military station of the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces at the military garrison bases, and started by the invading sieges and military raids of the military general headquarters and military garrisons and bases of the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces in Jalajala, and they fought the invaded and entering of all stronghold Filipino troops and officers under the Philippine Commonwealth Army and Philippine Constabulary units. After the invading sieges by the Japanese military GHQs and garrisons in Jalajala, he entered and capturing the Japanese military GHQs and garrisons in Jalajala by the successfully victorious of all Filipino troops and military officers under the Philippine Commonwealth Army and Philippine Constabulary units, recaptured and taken the camps with the flagpole raised and up the Philippine war flag for the Philippine Commonwealth military, and they surrendered and retreating Japanese imperial forces. The aftermath of the Allied invasion of Jalajala on August 1945. The local military and guerrilla resistance casualties during the fighting and the battle and invading commands and they succeeding battles and invasions, including 4,600 Filipino troops under the Philippine Commonwealth Army and Philippine Constabulary units, was killed in action and 11,300 wounded in action, while the local Rizalino guerrilla resistance fighters under the Colonel Markings guerrillas and the Hunters ROTC guerrillas suffered over 960 killed in action and over 2,160 wounded in action. On the part of the Japanese troops under the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces, over 27,000 killed in action, 38,000 wounded in action and over 19,000 captured in action. The Makapili collaborating rebels, over 120 killed in action, 230 wounded in action and over 740 captured in action. On 10,000 Rizalino non-combatant civilians killed by the Japanese military hands. The local Filipino soldiers under the Philippine Commonwealth Army and Philippine Constabulary units and the local Rizalino guerrilla resistance fighters under the Colonel Markings guerrillas and the Hunters ROTC guerrillas saluted by all decisive successfully victories after the invasion, and they captured in the municipal town of Jalajala, and finally the surrendered and retreated Japanese imperial forces and the Makapili collaborating rebels by the Filipino military forces in the town after the war. Demographics.